The room was too quiet. You could hear the ventilation hum the tap of Mercia's polished heel against the linoleum floor, and somewhere in the back, someone's pen clicking nervously over and over. I stood by the conference room screen, my 47-page client relationship audit open and projected in crisp detail until it wasn't. "This is garbage," Mircea said flatly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone carried the weight of a verdict already decided. The cursor hovered for just a moment as if offering me a chance to beg, defend, or retreat. I did none of those things. I couldn't. I was frozen. Then he clicked delete. A quiet gasp broke the silence. I couldn't tell who made it. My stomach dropped as the screen went blank, erasing not just a year's worth of strategy and metrics, but the subtle scaffolding I'd built between this company and the clients who kept it afloat. Personal notes, follow-up patterns, warmth context, gone. Every kind word from a client, every successful upsell linked to trust, every proof point I'd spent sleepless nights compiling, erased in a single keystroke. Mircea turned away, satisfied, as if he had swatted a fly. "This company will return to professional grade standards immediately," he announced. "We're not here to make friends. We're here to deliver results." 18 colleagues said nothing. No one looked me in the eye. I clenched my hands together behind the back of the chair to keep from shaking. Somewhere between disbelief and humiliation, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I stepped out of the room like a ghost, numb legs moving on their own. The display lit up. Voltron Partners. I blinked. The timing was absurd. Voltron was our most aggressive regional competitor. Why would they be calling me now, minutes after I was professionally gutted in front of half the department I answered, trying to steady my voice? "This is Soraya." The voice on the other end was calm. "We've been watching what's happening at Lixtel, and we think it's time we talked. It hadn't started as a rebellion. I just wanted to do my job well." When I first joined Lixtel, the onboarding manual was 68 pages of sterile jargon scripts metrics, timing intervals down to the second. It treated every client like a block in a supply chain. Deliver onboarding phase 1 within 2.5 days. Ensure phase 2 occurs within 6.0 days after login verification. There was no room for nuance, no room for people. But people, not processes, are what I've always understood. So I listened. When a client mentioned their child's college graduation, I made a note. When someone vented about a chaotic office move or a mother-in-law's surgery, I followed up. Not because it would boost some metric, but because it was human. After all, how could we ask people to trust us with their systems if we couldn't even remember what mattered to them? I didn't broadcast what I was doing. I kept my client profiles off the main CRM, just private notes, small gestures. Over time, I noticed patterns. Clients returned my calls faster. They looped me in on expansion plans. Several even referred us to their peers, not because our software was better, but because I made them feel seen. 3 months in, I submitted a report showing our team's client retention had improved by over 20%. By the end of the year, it had reached 41%. Mircea skimmed the report once and dismissed it. "Correlations aren't causations," he said. "Besides, you're spending too long on each client call. Touchpoint speed matters more than emotional detours." He printed off a chart comparing my average call duration to the team's. I remember staring at that red bar, my bar stretching beyond the others like it was a mark of shame. But what that red bar really meant was that I was giving people time. And time, I'd learned, builds trust. I didn't fight him then. I just kept going. By the time he assigned me the audit, I knew what it really was, a trap. He wanted to prove I was inefficient. Instead, I gave him evidence that loyalty isn't built in sprints. It's built in quiet minutes that most people don't even see. And now he'd seen enough to be afraid. It came in the form of an email titled Compliance Request. Mircea didn't even speak to me directly. He just copied the entire management tier and gave me 2 weeks to complete it. He wanted me to audit every client interaction I'd handled over the past year document, the timestamps, tone, objective, and business outcome. Hundreds of calls, emails, notes, follow-ups. I was to justify line by line how my personalization efforts were impacting the business. It was punishment dressed up as protocol. Everyone knew it. For 2 weeks, I arrived early and stayed late, combing through every thread of communication. Not to defend myself, but because I wanted the truth in writing. And not just the what and when, but the why. Why Delina Rose referred us to 3 healthcare clients after I remembered her board's budget cycle. Why Roddy Lanes renewed his contract a quarter early after I asked about his father's surgery. I created columns no spreadsheet had room for client emotional response, trust indicator, resulting decision. I pulled data from retention dashboards, tracked new contract values against notes I'd written on the backs of napkins. It wasn't just a defense. It was a map showing how something as small as remembering a client's kid's name could open doors to 6-figure deals. 47 pages. That's what it became. A stitched-together anatomy of relationship-based revenue. I titled it, Cumulative Impact Analysis Trust as Value Generator. I submitted it in silence. Murcha didn't respond for 3 days. When he did, it was a calendar invite. All-hands strategy review. I was told to present my findings to the team for training purposes. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd changed his mind. That the numbers would speak louder than his prejudice against empathy. That perhaps I'd proven what I needed to. I didn't know it then, but the presentation he had planned wasn't to celebrate my work. It was the stage he'd built to dismantle it in front of everyone. I should have known the moment I stepped into the conference room. There was no projector set up, no handouts. Just my report already pulled up on the screen behind Mirchu, his arms crossed like he was preparing for a trial mine. Let's walk through a recent example, he said, clicking to a page with Constance Farweather's profile. Client notes include, discussed upcoming anniversary, asked about office renovations, inquired about hiring strategy. He looked at the room eyes, scanning for disapproval. This is how we're spending our time. No one responded. The room was still. I sat in the front row, hands folded so tightly they ached. He clicked again. Followed up on dog's recovery, he read aloud, raising an eyebrow. Is this a veterinary firm? No. Then maybe this is what happens when we confuse personal chit-chat with professional service delivery. He moved fast, flipping through pages, pointing at highlighted portions, like they were violations of code. Every line he chose, every highlight was carefully selected, not to tell the whole story, but to reduce it to something absurd. He never mentioned the revenue attached to those conversations, never mentioned the referrals or early renewals. This, he said now standing beside the screen, is a case study in non-compliant behavior. His finger hovered over the top right corner of the window. Starting today, we're realigning client communications with best-in-class operational efficiency. This approach, he tapped the delete button, ends now. Click. The file closed and a small pop-up confirmed permanent deletion. Not archived, not backed up. Gone. My throat tightened, but I refused to speak. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. He turned to the room, smug. We move forward. Anyone with questions can follow up with me directly. My phone buzzed in my lap. Voltron Partners. Would like to meet. Confidential. I read it twice, then slid my phone back into my pocket. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't just about timing. It was about impact. About someone somewhere finally noticing what was being erased. The rooftop cafe overlooked downtown Austin, all glass and concrete and July haze. I spotted him immediately, Arlen True, co-founder of Voltron Partners, dressed in muted navy, sipping espresso like he had nowhere else to be. When he saw me, he stood and smiled, not like a recruiter, but like someone who already knew me. Thanks for coming, Ms. Hallberg, he said as we shook hands. Though I have to admit, we've been wanting to talk to you for a while. I raised an eyebrow. We've been tracking client retention shifts at Lixtel for about 6 months, he said. The data pointed to one anomaly. You. I said nothing. Every client account that showed net growth or expanded engagement had one common thread: you. Your name, your direct involvement, your style. I looked out over the edge of the building, trying to process the strange weight of being seen after so long of being dismissed. We're building something at Voltron, he continued, and we don't want to reverse engineer your approach. We want you to lead it. He slid a folder across the table. Inside a formal offer, $500,000 base salary, performance incentives, equity, and beneath it all, a single sentence that felt like oxygen. You will have full autonomy over client relationship systems and team development. I don't want your files. Soraya, he said, I assume they've already been destroyed. We don't want documentation. We want you the way you make people stay, the way you make them feel remembered. We're betting that the future of consulting isn't faster responses or better dashboards. It's people, and you already know how to build that. I exhaled slowly, the weight of a year catching in my chest. I need a few days, I said finally. Take the weekend, he replied, but just know we're ready. And so are the clients. They're not staying because of software. They're staying because of how you made them feel. I nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the shape of something solid under my feet. When I walked back into Lixtel the following Monday, I wasn't returning. I was preparing to leave. Monday morning arrived with the kind of artificial brightness only corporate overhead lights could produce. The conference room was already half full when I walked in. No one met my eyes. They'd all seen the file deletion. No one had said a word. Murcha stood at the front with a smug sort of calm, clicking through a fresh slide deck titled Client Communication Standardization for Scale. Behind him were templates, canned emails, preset check-in scripts, a color-coded flowchart showing exactly how to limit client interactions to under 10 minutes. This, he announced, is the future of scalable service. I raised my hand. His smile faltered, but he nodded. Yes, Soraya. I stood up. My hands didn't shake this time. I won't be participating in this rollout, I said, voice steady. Effective immediately, I'm resigning from my position at Lixtel. A few heads snapped up. A pen dropped to the floor. Murcha's lips parted, but no words came. I pulled the offer letter from my bag and laid it gently on the conference table in front of me. His eyes scanned the bolded header. Voltron Partners, Director of Client Relations. I'll be joining a firm that believes relationships aren't a side task, they are the work. I continued, a firm that knows trust isn't a checkbox. You can't just walk out, he stammered. There are protocols, transition plans. You haven't given proper notice. My contract allows immediate resignation in cases of professional misconduct, I said. Deleting a year of work in front of colleagues, that qualifies. Silence stretched. Even the air conditioning seemed to still. I'm done following systems that erase the human part of business. And with that, I gathered my bag, slid the chair in with care, and walked out. No applause, no confrontation, just the soft rustle of breath as 18 people silently recalibrated what they'd just seen. By noon, my desk was cleared. By 4, my badge turned in. And by the end of the day, my LinkedIn update was live. I didn't reach out to anyone. No emails, no pitches, no LinkedIn messages, asking clients to follow me. I updated my job title, listed Voltron Partners, and closed the laptop. That was it. 2 days later, the phone rang. Hi, Soraya, it's Delina. Delina Rose. Her voice had that same deliberate calm I remembered from our onboarding calls, the kind she used when discussing complicated compliance audits, but this time there was something else behind it, something warmer. I saw the update, she said. Congratulations. I just wanted you to know, you made us feel seen. Every time we worked with Lixtel, I felt like someone actually cared if we succeeded. It wasn't about the system, it was about us. I didn't speak for a moment. I didn't trust my voice. She cleared her throat. We've been evaluating vendors anyway, and well, I I told my team we should talk to Voltron. If you're heading up the client team there, we're interested. By Friday, 6 more had reached out. Roddy, Constance, Amir Patel from the West Coast, even Brick Yates, who'd once joked that I was the only person at Lixtel who knew his daughter's name. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Not bitterness, just quiet clarity. They weren't angry at Lixtel. They'd simply realized what they valued. And it wasn't efficiency templates or generic quarterly check-ins. It was the feeling that someone remembered their story. At the end of one call, Constance said, "You made our company feel like it mattered." That's rare. That's worth moving for. I kept track but didn't gloat. These weren't trophies, they were relationships finding their way back home. And somewhere between the 7th call and the next planning meeting at Voltron, it became clear I hadn't burned any bridges. I'd simply built a new one, and people were already choosing to cross it. The first sign came through a colleague still at Lixtel, a quiet message. Nothing dramatic. "Hey," Mircha's scrambling. 3 accounts pulled out this week. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. By the second week, it was 7. Then 11, all mid to large accounts. All ones I had worked with directly. Some I hadn't spoken to in months. But the trust had been there, built slowly, thread by thread. And when it frayed, it wasn't the system they remembered. It was the silence after I left. Mircha blamed me, of course. I heard he'd called a closed-door meeting with the executive team and implied I'd solicited clients' broken protocol. But the timeline betrayed him. Clients hadn't left right after I resigned. They waited. They tried the new system, and then they walked. Eventually, the board got involved. An inquiry was launched, exit interviews were reviewed, metrics analyzed. My name came up over and over, not as a threat, but as the common denominator in every stable long-term relationship the company had held. But there was no way to verify the data trail. Mircha had erased the audit. 47 pages of evidence gone. All the emotional through lines, the mapped patterns, the correlations between warmth and revenue, it had vanished with one click. And now the company had nothing to show for it. I imagined him sitting there staring at dashboards that couldn't explain why nothing was working anymore. Watching client churn tick upward with every passing day, realizing that all the pieces he dismissed as fluff had been the very framework holding the structure upright. Meanwhile, at Voltron, we weren't chasing clients. We were onboarding them. I didn't advertise transitions. I simply answered when they called. I showed up prepared. I remembered names, details, frustrations. I showed them that they were still seen. And as more accounts quietly crossed the line into our system, I could feel it building, not revenge, not satisfaction, just momentum. Quiet, steady. Until one afternoon I got a call I never expected to come from that direction. 2 months after I walked out of that conference room, I saw his name light up my phone. Damon Kessler, CEO of Lixtel. We'd spoken exactly twice during my tenure, once during onboarding, and once in a hallway where he mistook me for someone in finance. So when his number appeared now, I knew it wasn't personal. It was a signal. I answered. "Ms. Hallberg," he said, voice smooth, rehearsed. "Thank you for taking the call. I'll get right to it. We're exploring a strategic repositioning, and I'd like to discuss whether Voltron might be open to acquiring some of Lixtel's remaining client base." Remaining. That word hung in the air like dust. I listened without interruption. He explained the revenue downturn, the shift in retention, the operational inefficiencies that had crept in since my departure. Not once did he mention Mirchi by name, but the gaps were obvious. The structure had buckled. The facade was cracking. And beyond that, he continued, "We're reevaluating our leadership direction within the client relations division. I'd like to discuss the possibility of bringing you back in a senior director role with full autonomy." I smiled, not out of pettiness, but something closer to quiet clarity. "I appreciate the offer, Damon," I said, "but I've already found the place that values what I build without needing to lose it first to understand." There was a pause, a beat too long. "I understand," he said finally. "Still, if you reconsider, my door is open." After we hung up, I sat for a long moment staring out the floor-to-ceiling window of the Voltron office. The city looked different from this side, faster, somehow more alive. In just 2 months, I'd helped build a team that was doubling in size, led onboarding for 9 transitioning clients, and trained 3 new managers on empathy-driven retention frameworks. They didn't want me back. They wanted the results I had already created, but without the discomfort of ever having trusted them in the first place. What they didn't realize, and what I never needed to say, was that you don't rebuild what you refuse to understand. And as for Murchie, well, his silence wouldn't last much longer. 6 months in, I was named senior partner at Voltron. The title meant less than the trust it represented. I now led a client strategy division that had doubled in size since I arrived. We didn't just bring in accounts, we kept them, grew them, turned them into advocates who didn't just renew contracts, but sent handwritten thank you notes. I spent my mornings walking the floor, not because I needed to check on anyone, but because I liked hearing what mattered to people, their side projects, their first-time homeowner nerves, the dog someone was thinking of adopting. The very things I used to get side-eyed for noticing were now embedded into onboarding protocols, and they worked. One afternoon, I paused by my desk and opened my laptop. A new email blinked in subject line, "You remembered." It was from a client I hadn't spoken to in weeks. "I just wanted to say thank you," she wrote. "No one's ever remembered my daughter's graduation before, not even people in my own family. But you did. That meant more than I can say." I stared at the screen for a long moment, the weight of it quietly settling into place. That was the work, not a line item, not a talking point. That was the work. Later that week, I heard through a mutual connection that Murchie had been let go. The merger had moved quickly. Efficiency metrics had cratered. Revenue losses forced a reduction in leadership. Apparently, he was still looking, sending out resumes that danced around the retention crisis he helped create. There was no bitterness in me, just an understanding he hadn't deleted a document. He had deleted the glue, the audit, the notes, the profiles. They weren't files. They were memory, continuity, care. And when he purged them, thinking he'd erase the noise, he had unknowingly ripped out the very foundation his department had stood on. She deleted my files, not realizing they were the reason anything held together in the first place. And I built something stronger on the other side, not because I needed revenge, but because I finally had the space to do it right.